Hello everyone and welcome, Valiath here. The new Herald of the Sun hero towns for Holy Paladins was just released by Blizzard, and oh boy am I excited about what I am reading. But before we dig into these new towns, I want to say thank you to all my members and give a special shout out to my newest member, Mad Max. I appreciate you all and thank you so much for supporting the channel. But let us not delay any further. Let's dive right into reading these towns and discuss what this actually means for the class and what we might expect to see in War Within. I also want to know your thoughts and opinions of these talents, so make sure you leave a comment below. Starting with the keystone talent, Sunspot, which says, Holy Prism causes your next two Holy Power spending abilities to create a sunspot on your target, dealing damage or healing over 8 seconds. An added bonus is that an additional 10% of Sunspot's damage or healing radiates to nearby allies or enemies, reduced after 5 targets. I'm not a huge fan seeing that there's an AoE cap to this, but I can kinda understand why, because I can see this being a very strong ability. Okay, so let's digest what this keystone talent means. First of all, a huge issue with Holy Paladins for a while now is that our Holy Power spending abilities have been very lackluster and do very little to help our healing or damage. It's gotten so bad that many players don't even bother pressing them because they are so weak. The Sunspot talent increases the value of using our spenders, which is a step in the right direction. But it does not buff the spenders themselves. I really hope that they buff the spenders directly as well, as part of their rework for the new expansion. How much healing or damage these Sunspots will do remains to be seen, but I'm very happy to see that they are at least doing something to make our spenders worth pressing. As we go through the remaining towns of this tree, keep this mechanic at the forefront of your mind, and connect all of the towns back to how they relate to sunspots. Going down to the next row in the left column, we have the choice between Morningstar or Gleaming Rays. Morningstar says that every 5 seconds, your next sunspot's damage or healing is increased by 5%, stacking up to 10 times. They also stack twice as fast outside of combat, which makes me think this is much more of an M+ talent. Gleaming Rays say that when Sunspots is activated, our Holy Power spenders deal 10% more damage or healing. Both of these options make our spenders directly more powerful, and further solidifies that Blizzard intends for us to care about Holy Power generation and spending in the next expansion. Both of these options seem quite good, but I believe Gleaming Rays is likely going to be the default choice for the majority of players for M+ and raid healing purposes. It requires very little effort from the player to manage, and just buffs our spenders an additional 10% when we have Sunspots out, which will basically be always. Now, to criticize this talent a bit, since we will have Sunspots out at all times anyways, more than likely, why wouldn't they just buff these spells separate from the hero talent tree and give us something more interesting as a choice node here? Not a huge fan of these types of talents, as they really have limited impact on my gameplay and decision making. I can see Morningstar being the preferred choice for DPS builds, where you know you'll have large packs of enemies and you can drop down a Sunspot that is 50% stronger right off the bat and do a good amount of damage. Moving into the center column of row 2, we have a talent that replaces our Word of Glory with a new spell called Eternal Flame. This new spell will still cost 3 Holy Power to cast, but it looks like there's no mana cost associated with it. This could just be a typo, or they just didn't include it, as Word of Glory currently costs 3000 mana as well as 3 Holy Power to cast. Eternal Flame does direct healing to an ally and also puts a hot on them for 20 seconds. And it also happens to be 25% stronger when cast on yourself. Let's think about the last part of that sentence for a second. I don't know about you guys, but in general I don't put Beacon of Light or Faith on myself. So what this means is that if we cast this on ourselves, the healing it does will be stronger, which means that the amount of healing transferred via our beacons will be higher as well. This is a nice little min-maxing trick we will now have available to us, which I do like. Moving to the right column of row 2, we have the talent Luminosity. This is a simple 10% crit boost to our Holy Shock and Light of Dawn. This is not very noteworthy by itself, but the talent choices that this one opens up are quite a bit more interesting. So let's hop down to row 3 and column 3 to see what Luminosity opens up for us. The talent Sunseer makes our Holy Shocks and Light of Dawn critical strikes cause the target to burn for an additional radiant damage for 4 seconds or be healed for over 4 seconds. The Luminosity talent now makes sense, and crit will continue to be a high priority secondary stat for the War Within expansion. This is an interesting talent, as I can see this being good for both DPS and healing in both raid and M+, depending on how they tune it. Currently, Light of Dawn is only used in raid with a minimum 2 stacks of Blessing of Dawn, but this talent clearly wants us to consider using it in dungeons. This talent may have quite the interesting impact on our gameplay, as it allows us another spell combo that can be really effective for healing or damage, or so I hope. Light of Dawn targets 5 players, or enemies now with this talent, which means that you can have 5 enemies burning for radiant damage, or 5 allies with a HOD on them. Here's a spell combo that I immediately thought of after reading these talents. Number 1. Send out your Holy Prism to trigger your 2 Sunspot stacks. Assuming you're talented into Morningstar, which means that your next Sunspot has the ability to be 50% stronger. You then send out Light of Dawn onto your group for healing or enemies for damage, which triggers a boosted Sunspot for presumably a decent amount of damage or healing. Because of the Aurora talent lower down in the tree, this first Light of Dawn is completely free. You then spend your pooled holy power on another Light of Dawn for even more dots, hots, and sunspots. Now that rolls off the tongue pretty nicely, so I think I found the title to my video here. This spell combination I'm hoping will be quite powerful. It all depends on how they tune the damage and healing, but it's a combo that I'm super excited about trying out. My one big question is, how will Light of Dawn decide who gets the Sunspot? My gut tells me this will probably be RNG based, which is something I'm not too thrilled about. If you aim the Light of Dawn into a group of enemies that also happens to have allies in them, how will it decide which ally gets the hot and which enemy gets the dot? We're probably gonna have to wait to the PTR alpha to figure this out. The Holy Shock component to this talent will have less healing value directly, as it requires you to spread out your Holy Shocks to multiple targets for them to get the hot, very similar to what you're already going to probably be doing with Glimmer of Light. This means that whenever you apply glimmers, you'll be applying this hot as well, so it's not something you're going to be consciously or purposely doing for this small hot to be applied. Moving on to the center column of row 3, and we are faced with another choice node between Eternal Sun and Lingering Radiance. Eternal Sun increases your Sunspot's duration by 2 seconds for a total of 10, and it increases the duration of your Eternal Flame Hot by 3 seconds for a total of 23 seconds. Lingering Radiance makes it so your Sunspots leave an Eternal Flame for 12 seconds on allies, or a greater judgment on enemies when they expire. There's a lot to unpack here with this choice. Eternal Sun is the simplest of the two, as it requires basically no management from the player. All your new dots and hots have longer durations. That's about it, pretty simple. This is an okay choice to make, provided you actually get any value of the added time. In a raid environment where bosses take several minutes, you will for sure make use of the added time, so long as you don't clip it, which I know most people will do, including myself. For you that don't know, clipping means that you reapply a dot or a hot before it expires, meaning you lose out on the ticks that it could have had. Clipping is a DPS and HPS loss over time. Lingering Radiance is a much more interesting choice to me, as you can control the spread of your internal flame hot much better. You can do this because if someone has a Sunspot heal on them, you know that when it expires, they will get an internal flame hot applied. Because of this, you can use your actual internal flame on a different player that doesn't have the Sunspot on them to spread this out more purposefully. I can see this be quite strong in a raid environment, but I'm starting to get concerned with the number of dots and hots it looks like we're going to be managing in the next expansion. I don't want to be a druid where my entire gameplay is managing hots, and my direct spells are less powerful because of this. I really hope Blizzard finds a good balance where all of this doesn't become an absolute nightmare to manage. But moving on, let's not forget the damage component of this choice either. It leaving a greater judgment on your enemies means less damage taken by your group, and most likely your tank. This will never be wasted healing in any form, as it reduces damage done. Suffice it to say, I am liking Lingering Radiance more for this choice node. Moving on to the left column of row 3, where we also have a choice node to pick from. This time we're picking between Ilumine and Will of the Dawn. Ilumine makes your sunspots reduce the movement speed of enemies by 50% and increases the movement speed of allies by 20%. Will of the Dawn increases your movement speed by 5% while above 80% health, and increases it even further by 40% if you fall below 35% health for 5 seconds. This has a 60-second internal CD though. Right off the bat, both of these talents scream PvP to me, Will of the Dawn more so than Ilumine. I am looking at this from a PvE lens, and I think Ilumine will have a higher uptime for PvE content than Will of the Dawn. Ilumine lasts the entire time we have sunspots out, which will likely be almost all the time, unless they significantly change the Holy Prism cooldown for some reason. It is looking like Light of Dawn will be a high priority spender to use for Sunspot application. But the problem with that is that it's likely going to be RNG based on who gets the Sunspot. This means that the movement reduction of this talent will not be something you can overly control. Will of the Dawn just sounds like it could be very useful in PvP arena in order to break away and escape certain death. I don't know PvP at all, so let all you PvPers out there add your thoughts in the comments. Let's move down to row 4 and check out the talent Aurora. This says that every time you use Holy Prism, you gain Divine Purpose. Now this changes several things we've been discussing. Divine Purpose makes your next Holy Power spender free of charge. I'm going off the assumption here that even though your spender is technically free because of this, it will still count towards one of the uses to trigger Sunspots. Think of this in combination with what we've been discussing on how our Sunspot talent works, and the combo with Morningstar and Sunseer. As soon as you hit Holy Prism, you can push out 2 Sunspots within 2 global cooldowns, since the first one will be free, and you presumably have pulled enough Holy Power for a second cast immediately. Now think about our Light of Dawn combo we discussed earlier when we were talking about the Sunseer talent. We can immediately send out 2 Light of Dawns for huge amounts of healing or damage very quickly because of this. This might be a simple talent, but this has a huge impact on the smoothness of managing Sunspots and our Holy Power spenders. Very happy with this addition. Let's go over to the middle column to the talent Solar Grace, which increases your haste by 4% for 12 seconds each time you apply a Sunspot, and this can stack. Consider Aurora again. We can push out 2 Sunspots within 2 global cooldowns, which means we can get 8% haste very fast as well. Very strong synergies are starting to develop here towards the bottom of this tree. And in the third column of this row, the synergies just keep increasing. Second Sunrise says that Holy Shock and Light of Dawn have a 15% chance to trigger a second time at 30% effectiveness. Again, if we can push out double Light of Dawns back to back, we have a small chance to trigger even more of them for radiant burn damage on enemies or HOTS on our allies. And of course, we save the best for last, Sun's Avatar. During Avenging Wrath, or more commonly known as Wings, we become linked to all of our Sunspots, causing damage to enemies or healing to allies that pass through the beams, reduced beyond 5 targets. Also, activating Avenging Wrath immediately puts out 4 Sunspots onto nearby allies or enemies and increases Sunspots damage and healing by 20%. Okay, first off, think about the description of this and then paint that picture in your mind. You instantly create 4 Sunspots, and you likely have at least 2 of them out already. In this scenario, that means you'll have 6 divine beams of awesome extend from your character, dealing damage or healing to anything or anyone that crosses them. You are literally making yourself into a sun that is beaming out holy damage or divine healing around you. This is by far one of the coolest things Blizzard has done for the Paladin class in ages. The idea of it is just fantastic, and weaving in Avenging Wrath, the most Paladin spell we have, as the trigger for us to become the literal avatar of the sun is just brilliant. I cannot wait to see my Paladin run around with beams all over the place, healing allies and destroying enemies. But outside the sheer awesomeness of that, the instant application of 4 Sunspots is incredibly strong, especially since we're likely going to have a minimum of 1 to 2 of them out at all times to begin with. My question here is, will it prioritize allies or enemies, and how is it determined who gets what? The talent says it can go on allies or enemies, so I would not rely on this for healing every time you use it, as you simply have no control over who gets it. This talent will have use in both dungeons and raids, but obviously would have more value the more targets you have. Nowhere does it say that you can stack several Sunspots on the same target, so this is much more of a healing CD for raid than in dungeons. In dungeons, on the other hand, this will be super fun to use, as allies can walk into beams for healing regardless if it's attached to Sunspots for damage or healing. At least that is what I think it would do, because it doesn't say it wouldn't work that way. That is all of the talents, and I will say I'm very optimistic about how this is shaping up. Like I noted earlier, I'm a bit concerned with the number of HOTS we will all of a sudden have to track or manage. The HOT from Sunseer has no impact on our gameplay. It's not something we need to track or be concerned with. Sunspots will be something we want to track and manage to the best of our ability, as it does have impacts on our decision making. The same goes for Internal Flame, since it combos with sunspots, and we want to make sure we are conscious about who we directly apply the hot to, while giving consideration to the hot the lingering radius will apply, should you be picking up that talent. I am super excited about the overall structure and design of this hero talent tree. It feels well thought out and does not have a bunch of new spells or other craziness to bloat the entire spec. It takes what we already have and adds layers to it that actually improves our gameplay. I truly hope they do something with our spenders directly though. It's a great start to make the value of using them higher, which all of this does, but I really hope they don't make all of these resulting hots and dots and sunspots now completely overshadow our base spenders. I want my Word of Glory or Eternal Flame, Shield of the Righteous, and Light of Dawn feel strong and heavy, and not just be relegated to being a sunspot delivery system. This also needs to be balanced with our Holy Power generators as well. Holy Shock has been such an integral part of our gameplay for a long time now, and I hope that all of these new dots and hots don't overtake the importance of Holy Shock. Time will tell, but I'm feeling very happy with how our beloved Holy Paladin is progressing through the war within development. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. And I really want to hear everyone's thoughts about this talent tree as well. Each and every one of you have valid thoughts and questions about this talent tree, and I know all of us as a community want to hear them so we can discuss them as a group. And if you really want to help support me and the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps me out a ton. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.